We know that a change in price causes a change in quantity supplied. So a change in price causes a change in quantity supplied. So price in the vertical axis, quantity always in the horizontal axis. As price increases, quantity supplied increases. And a movement along the curve, these dots on the curve, are called a change in quantity supplied, because a change in price equals a change in quantity supplied. These represents different points, different prices, and different quantity supplied at each and every different point. We could actually even indicate that, like this may be our first price and this may be our first quantity supplied. So we'll just say that's, and this, maybe the price goes up, so now we have a new price, and we have a new quantity supplied. So that was our first quantity, Q1, second quantity, Q2, which resulted from our first price, P1, and our second price, P2. Put dotted lines to indicate where exactly it hits the point on the curve, and a dotted line down to represent exactly where the quantity supplied hits the axes, et cetera, et cetera. But what if something else besides price changes? What if something besides the price changes? Well, then all of a sudden, this supply curve is really no longer valid, because ceteris paribus, something else has changed. It means that producers may be willing and able to produce more stuff, even though they receive the same price for the product. Or producers may be less willing to produce less stuff, even though they're receiving the same price for the product. Something changed that changed the willingness of producers to sell something, right? And we know that if there's an increase in supply, well, we're going to shift that curve to the right. So an increase in supply would be a movement to the right. This would be a change in quantity supplied. This is a change in supply. Change in quantity supplied, change in supply. Well, what would cause producers to be willing to produce more stuff? Because right is more. Or maybe it's less. What would cause producers to be willing to produce less stuff? Because we know that whenever it's less, we're going to shift left, because left is less. So whenever it's less, we always are going to shift left, because left is less. So whenever it's less, we're shifting left, because left is less. Less is left, so we shift left when it's less. So whenever it's less, we're going left, because left is less. Left is definitely less, right? No, left. Left is less. So when it's less, we're going left, because left is less. So what would cause producers to be willing to produce less stuff, even though they may be getting the same price for the product? Well, remember, producers determine supply. So these are all things that would impact the producers. If it's a product market, all things that would impact the business. So we're going to give you an acronym that might help you out for these reasons of change in supply. All right? And so these are reasons for change in supply. All right? The first reason, these are all things that affect business or producers, all right? So these all affect producers. So one thing would be government regulations. No question, government regulation would affect the cost of business for a producer. When the government implements regulations, it definitely impacts the producer's costs, right? Government regulations will impact it. Expectations of the producer. Producers can expect things to happen with the future price also. So producer expectations, right? Taxes impact the producer. That'll impact the producer's bottom line for sure, as will subsidies. Subsidies for the producer. The government doesn't just take away money with taxes. The government can give businesses money with a subsidy. Both of those would affect how much a producer produces, more or less. Technology can affect how much producers produce stuff. Technology for sure. Now the biggest one we want you to know for sure is something we call the cost of inputs. Cost of inputs. That means that any ingredient that goes into making a good or service is an input. And those costs for the producer will definitely impact whether they can produce more stuff or less stuff. Producer productivity. And usually this refers to the workers themselves. Are they better trained? Do they have more experience? They could increase worker productivity and other sorts of productivity, which means they could produce more stuff. Or if something happens, they produce less. And then the last one is the number of sellers. How many sellers there are. As in, are there more producers producing or less? So it gives us this acronym, GETS TIPS. And that's what I'm giving you right now. That's what you're receiving right now. You're getting some tips here, right? That's the reasons for change in supply. And a change in supply is a shift of the supply curve. Whereas if it's just a change in price of this product, it would be a change in quantity supply.